the only show that's 3 dimensions away from Lord of the Rings of Power being called Lord of the Rings Middle Earth, or When Sauron Met with Galadriel. I'm your host, 3D Jake, and today we're looking at Lord of the Rings of Power, released in 2021. Lord of the Rings of Power is a TV show developed by Amazon, showrun by J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay. The show is written by Patrick McKay and J.D. Payne, and the show is essentially a prequelish. It follows the books and not the Peter Jackson beloved trilogy. The movie is essentially set. The TV show is essentially set little like it's before, way like 5,000 years before Fellowship of the Ring. So essentially, it's introducing new characters. Like it introduces, it has the Hardfoots instead of, of course, the hobbits. And then of course the focus is on Galadriel and Elrond and Sauron and different things like that. And there's also a stranger who may or may not be Gandalf or Saruman. So it just has mysteries, and there's dwarves, orcs, and all these kind of other things. The show stars Morvid Clark, Sarah Zavagwa, Markella Kavanagh, Megan Richards, Robert Amara, Benjamin Walker, Esmond Curve, Namin Bazar, Charles Edwards, Daniel Wayman, Owen Arthur, Charlie Vickers, Sophia Demura, Lloyd Owens, Maxine Baldwin, and Emma Horvath. Sorry if I butchered those names. Those are really hard to pronounce. And this show is essentially, it's a when Sauron. It feels the show. It sometimes feels like I understand a lot of criticism the show has faced. I mean, obviously, the show when it came out was not well received. Okay, and I honestly, rewatching the show, I was like, yeah, I could see why, because the show does not work on a lot of levels, but also it does feel one thing. It feels faithful to Tolkien's writing in a way where Peter Jackson understood when he read the novels. He understood, okay, what needs to be sped up, what needs to be discarded, what needs to be, kept in place, and what needs to just doesn't fit the story. And I will say, I'm not trying to compare this much to Peter Jackson's story, but it's kind of hard to, because that trilogy is so beloved. Even though The Hobbit took a fumble, I will say this one honestly feels like they took Patrick McKay and J.D. Payne took the wrong things from J.R. Tolkien. Instead of taking what Peter Jackson took, they went the opposite direction and said, let's try to just sit there and spend weeks, months telling this story. And we don't have to do a lot of action. We don't have to, and I feel like that's kind of the problem, because when you're doing a novel, you have a million years to sit there and talk, because it's like an open podcast. Compared to this, a movie or a TV show, you have exactly an hour to sometimes 45 minutes to tell your story. And if you don't hook the person in, they're going to turn on you. And I think that's what kind of happened. This show just does not work in a sense of, it just sits there and character builds, and it doesn't, and which is not bad, but when you're trying to engage the viewer, here's the thing, Game of Thrones, on the first episode, it hooked the viewer, and that's why Game of Thrones became the success it did. And that is based on a series of Song of Fire and Ice by George R.R. Martin. And this show, ironically, this and Game of Thrones have a lot in common, because they're coming both off beloved franchises, okay? Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, was a spinoff to Game of Thrones, which was a beloved series. And then this show, Rings of Power, is coming off of Peter Jackson's beloved trilogy, which is the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy, even though there's fumbles there. Even though, unlike Game of Thrones, which is connected to Game of Thrones TV series, this is not connected to the Lord of the Rings movies by Peter Jackson. Instead, this is its own universe of the that more follows the books, or its own canon of continuity. So essentially, Ian McKellen's not Gandalf in this universe, and Elijah Woods is not Frodo, and so forth. And this is, of course, there's characters that are in, that are in the first 10 minutes of Fellowship that are in this show, and they're played by different actors, and they're younger, because this is its own continuity, kind of like how you have Amazing Spider-Man, and then you have Spider-Man Homecoming, two different Spider-Man universes, And this is this like two different Tolkien universes, and I think that works in a way because I always said, I do think that Peter Jackson, who I think is literally the king of Tolkien next to Tolkien himself, like, I will say, I do like his universe, but I've always said there's always room for other people to tell their stories. And so this kind of had me excited to say, you know what? Peter Jackson can do whatever he wants in the movie verse. I want to see what they're going to do. I want to see them, do, Gandalf. I want to see them do Galadriel, and I want to see them like introduce this. And I actually, when they said, oh, the showrunner said at Comic-Con, we're not going to, we read the books, we read every single ounce of the books, we love the movies, and I really had hope for the show and everything. And I know the first trailer was like, it's just showing like, look how much money we spent. It's like, because it's the most expensive show ever made, and it just felt like the first teaser like, look how much money we spent, look how much money we spent, look how much money we spent. It's like, you gotta have a plot in a trailer. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's kind of how a trailer works. You can't just say, you might as well just walk out, have Jeff Bezos walk out and say, here's the check stub for the Rings of Power. Watch it. And then walk away and say, Rings of Power coming soon. That's what it kind of felt like. Or just have Jeff Bezos show the check stub and then show pictures of see, we had to build this. This was expensive. You have to watch Rings of Power. It's very expensive. Please invest in the show. And I think that right there, was like something I just felt like watching the show. I do think that there are some good things about this. I do like the mystery of who the wizard is, who the old man is, even though we know he's a wizard, and it's either Gandalf or Saruman. Even though some people would say, well, because I watched the OneRing.net and Nerd of the Rings, and so I kind of was like, okay, like I said, they said it's almost it break canon a little bit, but because, which again, it does already break canon because there's a lot of characters that were spread out that the Shards had to ask the Tolkien estate for permission to cram into this universe so they could fit and play their playground. But they said they did it to so that way they'd have an interesting story, which that's fine. And so I don't mind if they introduce Gandalf or Saruman because I want to see a good story. And if they can literally show Saruman, him being like this young, old, nice man and turn into the psychopath, I would like to see that. Or if they want to show Gandalf and then then we find Saruman and him they become friends and to see them become enemies, I want to see that too. I want to see, Sauron's rise, and it seems like with season 2 we're getting the rise of Sauron, like Sauron spreading his evilness and Numenor falling, and they even teased this in the first season, and we're gonna get all this stuff, and I was excited. The only thing is, though, I just feel like there's so much wool, but like the first 10 minutes of the show, if you get past the boat scene of and you get to that, if I would have started with that, I think that would have engaged me more. But then but it just feels like it takes its time and it doesn't really go anywhere. It just feels like it's sitting there explaining rather than just showing. And I'm just like, that's what I really had an issue with. It's like we spend so much time, either we're sitting there in the caves or we're sitting there in Numenor and they're just talking. And it feels like it doesn't really pick up until the last 2 episodes. That's when it really had me engaged. Like the Hobbit stuff had me engaged. And literally, and then with the orcs taking over the village, that had me engaged. Like I love with the orc storyline, whenever the elf and they're being taken slaves by orcs, that is a engaging story, and I love. There's a scene where they're running in the woods and the orcs shooting arrows. That had remind me of the Peter Jackson movies. I was like, this actually feels like Lord of the Rings right here. Whenever they show up on the horses and the Numenorians and they take out the orcs and stuff like that, and then that battle, that feels like Lord of the Rings. I was like, this has me engaged. Whenever they hit the thing and it turns into Mordor, that was awesome. I'm like, yes, more of this stuff. Whenever you see a future of Numenor falling, that had me also engaged. But then whenever it's just sitting there talking about, oh, you can't when the orcs or not the orcs, but the Numenorians, not the Numenor, but yeah, Numenorians are talking oh look, my name, and he says, my name is this, and I'm over here doing this, I'm gonna one day take out, but no, it doesn't say that, but literally when you have Max Bala's character, who's literally a famous character whose name I'm forgetting, when you have him who is one day gonna take out Sauron. And, he's kind of a goofiest character, which I, at the time, I was a little bummed about it. But then I'm like, He literally is the character that cuts off Sauron's head at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring and destroys Sauron. So that doesn't bother me. But whenever, like, they fake out, like, oh, did he die? Anyway, I'm like, bullshit. We know he doesn't because that break canon, because he's the one that destroys Sauron. And I was like, honestly, and the thing that I really will say is we spend way too much time, and also the show is called Rings of Power, right? They don't build the rings until the very last episode, in the last 10 minutes of the episode. I'm just like, it's called Rings of Power, and there are no Rings of Power. Imagine this be like calling a show waiting, and he said waiting for Superman, and there's no Superman. That's how I felt, just kind of like, why don't you just call it Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle Earth, or Lord of the Rings when Sauron met Galadriel? That would have been more accurate, because Sauron's in every freaking episode. He's literally a sexy man played by Charlie Vickers. Literally, Sauron is sexy. Why are they making villains sexy in this show? I don't understand. Okay, literally, villains are not supposed to be sexy. You're supposed to fear them. Imagine if the Night King walked out in Game of Thrones, had a 6 fucking pack, and was like, hey, Smolder, hey, baby, what's going on? I'm bad. I'm gonna Night King you. I got something ice and nice cold for you, baby. Yeah. I mean, but when you kind of feel like, what the fuck? Like, I'm supposed to fear this villain. Instead, it's like, this dude literally was with her. He's basically catfishing her. Literally catfishing her. And I was telling my friends, like, it's basically the whole season of Sauron catfishing Galadriel. That is literally the whole season of the show with Sauron. And then on top of that, I understand it's like, oh, it's like the Scream effect where it's like, oh, you don't know he's the villain until the. I'm like, the whole season kind of felt like they were doing like a love story. That would be like different. It's like, will they, won't they? Instead, it's like, yeah, I'm like, it's like he's a sexy man, and he's like, yeah, I'm Sauron. And he's like, I'm just like, come on. He doesn't say like that, but it was kind of just maybe like, why are they trying to make him a sexy man? I understand in the books and everything that he literally is like he does deception a lot, and he pretended to be an elf, which it sounds like season 2 they're going to explain this further, and I'm looking forward to that aspect. And I will say that, and also it just feels like they didn't forge the rings until she's like, oh my god, he's Sauron, and she goes and goes, oh, look at this ring, it's very pretty, and I'm just like, okay, oh, all right. Like, oh, I was like, I feel like sometimes you're being trolled, like on this show is being trolled. Like they were just like, it feels like sometimes they were just writing this as a joke, and then it accidentally went through and got made because they're like, oh, maybe we should do this, and they're like, oh yeah, it's funny, and then it was like, oh shit, we didn't mean to shoot that. Oh fuck, it's already in there. We'll just, nobody's gonna complain. But yeah, I will say there are some good things about this. There's some good stuff there, but sometimes I feel like it's muddied by the stupidity. And I was telling a friend of mine, we were joking in the chats about this show, and like one of my friends in a small talk group, Ryan Cam and Matt White, we were talking about this, and one of them, Matt White, who's like saying like, I watched it, I don't think it's that bad, but I didn't finish it. and then Ryan Cam was like, I didn't see it because I heard it's shit. And then I was sitting there explaining the whole Galad. I was like, so this show feels like it's with like, Sleepless in Seattle. It's like literally Sleepless in Middle Earth, or when Harry met Sally. It's like when Sauron met Galadriel. And then Ryan tweets, because it's shit, you see. It's like, and it just had me dying laughing. I told him, I'm gonna say that in this review. He's like, go ahead. I was like, but yeah, I mean, it's not a bad show. I'm not always trying to suck Peter Jackson's dick or nothing. I'm just saying, I just like he understood the assignment more than the guys who wrote Snow White and the Huntsman. I'm just saying they don't really understand the assignment that well. And although I do think that there's a lot of references to Lord of the Rings in this, and that's great. But you should also do one thing, and that is make a good story. But if I had to give this thing a score, I'm gonna say watch it at your own accord. Maybe put on as background noise, and if you like it, oh well. But if you don't, I'm sorry. I'm hoping season 2 changes my mind. If I had to give this thing a score or a grade, I'm just gonna give it a movie grade since it's everything's streaming now. If I had to give this a grade, I would give it a B. Thank you so much.
Without it, what am I to be?